Okay, there's Pool Everywhere stuff up online. Whoops. Okay, problem set 5 due on Friday. Just remember the test is going to be in less than 2 weeks now. We're going to do a little bit of review today. It's not going to be it's not going to be cumulative in the sense that we're not going to be talking about like elasticities of demand and supply, and we're not going to be talking about the opportunity costs and the PPF and that kind of thing. But you still need to know how to calculate equilibrium, right? You still need to know how like shifters relate to things. We're in the context of what we're talking about right now, right? Like in the labor market, in the money market, that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's all that I have. Does anybody have? Yo, I love it. Chocolate or fruity? Fruity. Oh, my bad. It's gonna happen today, so everybody's got to look alive. So there you go for being a good sport. All right, so all right, today here's the deal. I said we're gonna celebrate what today? Somebody raise your hand and tell me. Halloween. We're celebrating Halloween. If you answer any question or ask any question today, look alive. Candy's coming your way. If you're in the back, if you're in the very back and you answer a question, look alive like towards the middle back, because I'm just throwing it. I'm not coming back there to give it to you. Okay. So, yeah, so I love Halloween. We talked a little bit about it. Pagan festivity, if you celebrate other stuff, that's totally fine with me, but we're talking about Halloween today. Not really. We're talking today about something a little bit less exciting in my opinion, but just a little bit. We're going to go over fiscal policy and also do a little bit of review, because fiscal policy, hopefully by this point, should be pretty straightforward. So I'll answer any questions you guys might have about what we've done up to now. And if anybody has any questions about the problem set, I can kind of broadly go over it as it benefits the class. I have office hours today from 12 to 1. And then I have office hours tomorrow. Ishan also has his office hours, which I'm blanking on the time. Does anybody remember what time they are? 1 to 2. All right. All right. Good try. Christopher, that almost smoked your head. You got to look alive. All right. So 1 to 2. Yeah, so that's all happening. Trying to think of anything else. I got everybody's writing assignments. I'm looking through them. I'll review them, and I'll post the grades when they're done. Okay. Oh, one other thing. So we're going to be skipping recitation 9. Because we kind of did an example of it in class. I'm going to leave it up for you guys if you want to go over it on your own. It's just going through the money creation process. Unfortunately, due to some, we'll call not established copyright laws. So it's not a real law, but just kind of informal law. I can't post the I can't post for you guys the answer key for it. So you're gonna have to come to office hours if you want to walk through that recitation. The money creation process, we went over it in our notes. It's the same idea. We've talked all about it, but I'm not gonna be able to post the answer key for you because I got the material from somebody else, and they pretty much the only thing that they asked me to do was not post the answer keys for any of their tests. So I make my own tests and recitation activities. So I can't. So yeah, you got to come to office hours or talk to me about it before or after class. Okay. Okay. Before we get started, actually, let's go through this quick. Just a recap of monetary policy, some of the high points. The Fed, or the Federal Reserve, uses its tools to influence the money supply, right? They have these 3 different levers that we've talked about. But if they don't do that, the economy will self-correct, leading to a price level change, which is, inflation or positive or negative inflation. And then in the face of an inflationary gap, the Fed enacts contractionary monetary policy. And if there's a recessionary gap, they enact expansionary monetary policy, right? And we talked about kind of like the informal 6 steps that we had for how that works. I think it's really you should know how those things work. You should know how to distinguish it from self-correcting mechanism and its steps. And then today we're going to talk about fiscal policy and its steps. Okay. I definitely think that that's something that we're going to want to make sure that we understand the differences of. Okay. Okay. Any questions about that, Christopher?
I thought about that, but how do excess reserves work? Like, what is an excess reserve, and how does it affect money?
Yeah, good question. So excess reserves are when I make a deposit into the bank has to keep some of that in reserves legally. There's a legally binding percentage that they have to keep in reserves. I actually think the number right now is basically 0. So whatever, doesn't matter, but it used to be 10%. Okay. 10% in their vault, basically, you can think of it as. And then the rest of it, they can loan out. So if I make $100 deposit, the excess is going to be $90. That's what I can eventually loan out. Okay. I can loan out that $90 to a business or something like that. That business takes that $90, they buy a new mini tractor or something. Okay. Then that $90 from the tractor company gets deposited back into the bank. And then we go through the same process again. And then, bless you, $81, right? $81 because we take 10% of 90% of that $90 deposit, and that's $81 left over.
What happens to the bank?
Yeah, so there are 2 different types of, sometimes it gets called leakage or something like that. If it just sits there, then the money creation process will be slower. Okay, that's all that I want you to know. If not all of it gets loaned out, or if not all of it gets deposited back in, the money creation process will be slower. So less money will be created from those deposits. Okay, that's all that I need you to know about that. We don't need to get into specifics. Okay. If you want to talk more specifically, you can. Good question. Okay, let's talk about the poll everywhere questions. I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to go over these. So I'll give you guys, for those of you who haven't done them yet, 2 more minutes to go over it. And then we'll talk about all 3 of them. One of them is kind of a way back. But I'm going to start doing that as we get closer to the test, doing a couple of questions here and there that kind of are going way back in time for us. Okay, let's do like 30 more seconds. All right. Okay. First one, we have a new money technology comes out, which makes it easier for people to access money from the bank and get short-term loans. This would eventually lead to SRIS shifting right, AD shifting right, or sorry, SRIS shifting left, AD shifting right, AD shifting left. Okay, so I'm now realizing that this might be. Okay, so the idea that I was looking for here is we have a new money technology. That's something that shifts what? Money demand, right? Right? And if we which way would money demand shift? To the right or to the left? To the right. Okay. And that would increase the nominal interest rate or lower the nominal interest rate? Increase the nominal interest rate, right? So the idea here is this is our money market, right? This is the interest rate, quantity of money. We have a money supply, money demand. If the money demand increases or shifts to the right, the interest rate will go up, right? Okay, so it's going to go up. Okay, so if the interest rate increases, that's going to lead to a shift to the right, eventually in aggregate demand, because as the no, it's not. Just everybody put it down. So if the interest rate goes up, the cost of a loan increases, and that means that investment will fall, which will. Wait. Did you guys all say money demand shifts to the right? No, it's to the left. I was like, how did this question? Sorry, I must have misheard you guys or something. So let's call this guy money demand prime, this guy money demand. Money demand falls, right? Okay, the reason why money demand falls, we have a new technology that comes out that makes it easier to access money, right? We talked about this example yesterday and last week. The idea is that you don't have to hold as much cash, you don't have to hold as much money in your checkable deposits, because there's something that happened, think like a credit card, that makes it easier for us to smooth out our consumption, okay? I didn't say credit card here because that's what the example I used in class was, but it's that kind of idea, okay? So that would decrease the interest rate, which would lead to increased investment and then increased consumption, which would shift aggregate demand to the right. As far as for those of you who put shifting aggregate, shore and aggregate supply to the right, if you were like, took it one step further and were like, well, eventually self-correcting mechanism, something's gonna have to happen, then sure. Then I understand where you're coming from. But one thing we want to be careful about here is we didn't say anything about where we were at in the long run right now, right? So if you said SRAS shifts to the right and you were like, well, I know that if we are in equilibrium and then AD shifts to the right, then we have an inflationary gap, right? And if we have an inflationary gap, eventually SRAS has to shift to the right if nothing else happens for the economy to self-correct itself, right? Or something like that. Just remember, we didn't say anything about the long run equilibrium here. So we don't know if this shift is bringing us closer to the long run equilibrium, further away. We don't know. So we don't need to think about the self-correcting mechanism unless we talk about anything that happens in the long run. Okay. And if you just put SRAS shifts to the right because you didn't know, just go through and review for yourself the shifters of SRAS and the shifters of aggregate demand and the shifters of money demand and money supply, right? And how those influence aggregate demand. Oh, C, or number three, the third one. Whoops. AD shifts to the right. Yep. No, you're good.
I think where I got confused was like when we pulled in the demand, like, at least I was confused.
Yeah. So why are we talking about money demand? We have a new money technology, right? So that's going to influence the money market. Okay, so let's take it one step at a time. Okay, we have the money market. And we know that this is something that's important in macro because we talked a lot about it, but also because money is something that influences the macro economy, right? Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to take it one step at a time. We say, okay, this is our money supply, money demand market graph, right? We have some equilibrium interest rate. I'm going to say I star. Okay. Okay, so new money technology comes out. That's going to shift aggregate or money demand to the left. Okay, it's one of the shifters of money demand. It's going to shift it to the left. If you're like, wait, how do I know that that's the shifter of money demand or the demand for money? I would highly suggest you review your notes from last chapter. Okay, that's going to make the interest rate fall, right? Okay, so the interest rate falls. What do we know about the interest rate and its relationship with investment and consumption, right? Well, if investment and consumption, if interest rates change, then investment's going to change, and then consumption's also going to change. Okay. So if investment change or if interest rates change, go down. If interest rates go down, then investment and consumption are going to go up. Why are they going to go up? Because the interest rate is the opportunity cost, right, of holding money. It's also the price of a loan, right? So it's just the price of something. So if the price of a loan goes down, more firms and companies and producers are going to want loans to expand their operation. And they're going to, and if you're like, well, I don't understand why would they want to get a loan? Why wouldn't they just do it with the money they already have? I think it will be helpful for you. Like, we can put that on the back burner a little bit, but think about the idea that businesses are always trying to get low interest loans because they can have they can get a higher return for themselves on that loan, okay, than the interest rate. So they're always trying to get really low interest loans. So if the interest rate falls, more businesses are going to want to get loans, okay? And if we go back to our principles class, like think about it like every decision is made on the margin. So let's say the interest rate is 5%. if you lower it to 4%, there's going to be somebody out there who is like, oh man, I just can't do it at 5%. I can't get my like business started. I can't expand my operation. But if it was 4%, I could definitely do it. Okay. And that's the idea here. So there's going to be more investment. And then when there's more investment, that leads to more consumption too, because you expand operation, things are easier for people to consume. They're going to want more goods, that kind of thing. Okay. So investment and consumption are going to go up. Okay. Well, why does that matter? Just remember that aggregate demand, right? We have Y equals C plus I plus G plus net exports. That's going to impact aggregate demand. It's going to lead aggregate demand to shift right or go up. Okay. Okay. So I think maybe I did this question intentionally so that people would kind of get the idea here. We need to be able to connect things across units, right? So we're talking about something in money. That was chapter 18. And then we went to chapter 19 immediately. And then we were told something about chapter 18 topic money. And then the question is asking us about something in chapter 19. So we need to be able to connect things across chapter here, okay? Really important for this unit. I think I've said it a number of times. If I haven't, definitely need to start thinking about how these things are connected, okay? Okay. Okay, any more questions? Yes. Good question. But so money, right? We defined money as, bless you, a bunch of different things, but it can be currency, right? Like the money in our pockets. It can be checkable deposits, right? The money that we have in the bank that's in checking. It can be other types of government checks or whatever. And then there's two types of money. There's two categories, right? M1 is the more liquid things. And then when you include M2, the less liquid things, you include savings deposits and other things like that. That's what money is. Yep. Yeah, the idea is, well, it doesn't even have to be cash currency, right? The idea is if you don't have a credit card, then you literally have to either have the money today, right now. Like you have to have the money today, right now to get something. But if you have a credit card, you don't need to. You can have the money tomorrow or the next day. So that's going to make people need less money. Because if I need to have the money for some possible thing that I need in the future, I'm going to save it up more. I'm going to hold on to it more. Okay. But if I don't care. I'm not going to hold as much of it. Okay. I might put it in a house. I might put it in a car. I might put it in gold. Things that are related, that are valuable, but they're not like the currency that I'm holding or in my bank. Good question. Okay. Okay. The other market that we also need to think about and make sure that we understand and how it's connected to all of this is the labor market. Okay. Some of you have already had recitation, and then we're going to have, and then the rest of you will have recitation. Hopefully that'll hone in on what could be going on in the labor market too. Okay. Okay. Next question. Okay. Recall the money creation process discussed in chapter 18. If I deposit $1,000 in my checking account and the reserve ratio is 20%, then after 3 rounds of deposits, the money supply will have increased by 2440, increased by 1,000, increased by 1440, decreased by 1,000. Okay, so we're going to walk through this one together here. All right. This is a review question. It wasn't necessarily chapter 19, but I just really want to hone in here on what's going on. Okay. Okay. The first thing that we need to do. So I'm titling these notes money creation process. Right. First thing that we need to do here is decide is the initial deposit already a part of the money supply? Okay, maybe you don't need to do this first. You could also technically do it last, but I just want to know right away. Okay. If I deposit $1,000 into my checking account, okay, well, that money had to come from somewhere, probably from a salary, from wages, from a bank, somewhere else in the money supply already. So the answer here is yes. Okay, when would it be the case that it's no? Okay, two possibilities usually. Okay, I can't think of another one. There could be others, but these are the two ideas that I have in my head. If I explicitly say so, if I explicitly tell you that this money was not a part of the money supply, or if you hear that it comes from the Federal Reserve, okay? Because the Federal Reserve, they're taking money from the Treasury, they're saying, print this money, we're gonna buy these bonds back, okay? It's coming from nowhere, okay? That money is from outside of the money supply, insofar as we care about this class, yeah. Changes in reserves, oh shoot. Oh, like what are the eventual changes to those things?
No, it's the use that it says a thousand.
Okay, let's walk through this and then maybe this will answer your question, okay? Yeah, let's talk about it. Okay, I think I know where we're going, but I want to walk through this and then I might answer your question. Okay, because I don't remember off the top of my head. Okay, so the answer is yes. Okay, we need to keep this in the back of our minds. Then I'm going to draw a table. That table is going to have the deposits, the reserves, and the excess reserves, or what gets loaned out. Okay, so this is if it says loans instead, they're equivalent. Okay, it might say if it says changes sometime, also the same idea. Okay, because what's happening in round one, we make $1,000 deposit. So deposits are changing by $1,000. Okay, so yeah, I might sometimes be flippant and not do the changes, but I guess technically it is a change. If we have what did we say? The reserve ratio is 20%. Okay. Somebody tell me how much the reserves need to change. Okay, close. So 20%, 200. Yep, you're good. And then our excess reserves are going to change by $800. It's sad. Okay, so I hope that's straightforward. All that we're looking for here is you deposit money into the bank. How much do your deposits change? What that means is the bank, like Wells Fargo, has a certain number of customers. They have all of their deposits are part of their book, right? Okay. Then when somebody comes in and they deposit money, and if the reserve ratio is 20%, that Wells Fargo needs to hold $200 in its vault somewhere so that you can go and get it out. Okay. Now I know for a fact that Wells Fargo does not do that, because I tried to get cash out to go get a car and they wouldn't let me do it, but whatever. Anyways, so changing excess, and so then the rest of that money can be loaned back out. Okay. Now Christopher asked a really good question earlier. He said, what if they don't loan it back out? What if it sits in here? Let's keep that in the back of our mind, and we'll answer that question at the end as like an extra question. I know it wasn't part of what we were talking about. Okay. So then we're going to say that we're always going to assume, unless otherwise said, that all of that money that is in excess reserves will get loaned back out. Okay. That loan goes to some business or some person who is going to then spend it. Okay, we're going to assume that they're going to spend all of it unless we say otherwise. Okay. Okay, so then after they spend it, $800 goes back in. Okay, and we do the same thing. 20% of $800 is $160. Okay. Okay, so the reserves now need to be $360. Then what can be loaned back out? Well, the rest of it, the excess reserves, $640. Okay. Again, we're going to assume the same thing. All of the excess reserves will be loaned out, and all of that money that gets loaned out will be spent and deposited back into. It doesn't necessarily have to be into the same bank, but into a bank, and so that they can continue this money creation process. Okay. And we said we're going to do 3 rounds of this because that's what the question asked. $640 gets deposited back in. 20% of that is $128. Okay, so that leaves us with $512 that can then, if we went into a 4th round, be going back up. Okay, now we need to figure out what the change in the money supply was. There are 2 ways that you can do this. You can either what did I say actually? Okay, so after 3 rounds, we have a change in deposits of $2,440. Okay, but from our first thing that we said, we know that 1,000 of that amount, a $1,000 chunk out of that was already a part of the money supply. So we need to subtract that off. We have $1,440 is what, after 3 rounds, the change in the money supply would be. Okay. If we were to do this out and go out and do it for 1,000,000 or billion times, that formula that we had, where we would take, one sec, Christopher, where we would take 1 over the reserve ratio times the initial deposit, right? Take that and subtract the initial deposit. That is going to get us, if we were to either go through this process 1 billion times, right? Taking like, then $512 gets deposited back in, and go 20% of that, and the rest of it will get loaned back out, and do that forever. That's going to get us the same thing as this right here, which is the change in the money supply overall. Okay. Or you could say, you could take the initial change in the excess reserves, if you know that the initial deposit wasn't part of the money supply, or was part of the money supply. Christopher?
Should it not be?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. This is, yeah, thank you. It's $1,000 here.
And so if it was like the treasury buying bonds or something, or yeah.
Yep, buying.
That would not be minus commission.
Perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. That's the one thing we wanted to get. Somebody have a question back here? Okay, great. Okay, Christopher, I'll hold your candy up here because you can come get it. All right, so any more questions about this? Yeah, so if the money comes from outside of the money supply originally, then we don't subtract off the initial deposit. Okay. Because that money was not a part of the original money supply. Yeah. Yeah, but think about it's checkable deposits, right? Like, So in your bank right now, like you deposited cash, almost for sure, at some point. The bank is taking that cash, they're giving you numbers on a screen, and then they're loaning out the same cash that you gave somebody that you put into the bank. They're loaning out 80% of that. And then that 80% is going to get deposited back in, and somebody else is going to have 80% of the same amount. Like that same cash that you deposited, somebody else is going to deposit, and that's going to go into their checkable deposits too. Okay, is that helpful? Olivia?
The person who made the original deposit comes back and once it's full enough, the bank is gonna.
Yep. This happens really rarely. And also it's also, the answer is yes. So someday you guys will all go to the bank. I've had this happen to me one single time. I've gone into the bank and I've said, I want to withdraw this money that I have in my bank account. And they've said, no, we don't have that much money to give you. Now, really, they probably did, but if they would have given it to me, they would have gotten in trouble because then their reserves would have been too low and it cost them money to go get more money. So they were just being crappy people. And that's why I hate the banks. But yeah, in theory, that's what happened. If you've taken an American history class during the Great Depression, there were runs on banks, which like people would go to the bank and then the bank would be like, we don't have any money to give you. And then they would go home and tell their neighbors, and their neighbors would go to the bank. And then eventually they would burn the bank down because everybody was so mad. Like it was crazy. So that kind of thing would happen. There are things that are put in place now to make that not be the case. But yeah, you can't necessarily always get the cash that you want. Okay, there was that. Yeah. The eventual change in the money supply in this case would be 1,000 over 0.2, so 5,000 minus 1,000, 4,000. I mean, the eventual change in loans is just going to be 4,000 in this case, because minus the initial reserves. Nah. So, well, okay. So just so we're clear here, I'm not in the business of like what's the answer on the problem set so much. But for this example, like just take a step back and like from like, okay, well, I just need the answer, Jacob. And like, what are we asking for? We're asking for the change in reserves. Well, we know the change in deposits, that's going to be 5,000, right? We know the change in the money supply is 4,000. Okay. We also know that the amount that gets deposited, 20% of that has to be in reserves. So what's 20% of 5,000? 1,000. Okay. And we know that all the rest of that is going to get loaned out, right? So 5,000 minus 1,000 is 4,000. Is that helpful? And that's all that the problem set is asking for. It's like, oh, look, all of these things add up to each other. And also, we didn't necessarily go over them exactly in class, but like, if I understand the concept here, so I kind of blew it for you guys now because we've gone over it now, but like, that's kind of the point of the problem set is if we understand the concept well, then hopefully we can kind of test ourselves for what's going on. And so, yeah, so we know the change in deposits is going to be 5,000. We know the change in the money supply is 4,000. That's a little bit of a separate question. But 20% of the change in deposits has to be in the bank. It has to be. It's the law. And then the rest of it is getting loaned out. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay. Okay, we have one more question. Any more questions about this? I know, yeah. Yep. Yeah, because we're just going over 3 rounds of the money creation process here. It's the idea and how the idea here is like what happens in real life. is that we do this over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. But we're not gonna go through and calculate out over and over and over 100 times. So we have this like accounting formula that'll tell us if we were to do that, how much the money supply would change. And it might take a really long time in some cases, and we're not, if you go take a finance class or a money and banking class, you'll talk about the speed at which deposits and stuff, but we're not talking about that in this class. Okay, is that helpful? Okay. Okay, next one, Ishan goes to the bank to take out student loans. After meeting with the Wells Fargo guy, he's offered a loan with a nominal interest rate of 20%. Okay, apparently they don't trust Ishan to pay back the loan. If expected inflation is 6%, but actual inflation is 3%, then this is a review question. We're going back a little bit, but hopefully helping us get ready for the test. The real interest rate is 14%, and Ishan is better off than expected. The real interest rate is 17%, and Ishan is worse off than expected. The real interest rate is 14%, and Ishan is worse off than expected. And then same thing, 17%, and he's better off than expected. Okay, so the idea here is we have what are the numbers we're given? We're given 20% is his interest rate. Expected inflation was 6%, but actual inflation was 3%. Okay, the real interest rate, R, is equal to the interest rate minus inflation, the nominal interest rate minus inflation, which means that R equals 17%. Okay, so that's the first part of the question that we need to know. Second part that it asks about is Ishan better off or worse off than he thought he was going to be? Well, the person who gets the loan out is better off if inflation is lower than they thought, or sorry, higher than they thought, and worse off if it is lower than they thought. Okay, because his real interest rate, if inflation's lower, his real interest rate is higher. So his actual cost of his loan is higher than he thought it was going to be. So what did we have? We had that actual inflation was lower. So he is going to be worse off than expected, and interest rate is 17%. Okay. Okay. Hopefully that was a good amount of review. And we can talk more to in office hours today, or Ishan, you're going to go over some of this, and actually you're not going over this in our station, but I highly suggest going through the money creation process stuff that we talked about today, and the notes and the book, and achieve questions too, if you're getting stuck on it. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go over fiscal policy. We started talking about it last Monday, but what is fiscal policy? It's just changes in government purchases, taxes, or transfers in order to achieve macroeconomic policy objectives. I'm going to separate out. Last time I briefly, when we talked about this, I kind of said transfers and purchases were the same thing. They're a little bit different, and I'm going to separate them out. So government purchases, an example, anything that the military buys, or the government makes roads, they get concrete to make roads. Anytime the government buys something from a business, okay, right? What's a taxes example? Income taxes. That's probably one of the most efficient examples. Everybody has to pay income taxes. In theory, depending on how much money you make, you might actually have a negative real tax rate, but in theory, everybody has to pay income taxes. And then transfers, example, Medicare, unemployment insurance. These are things the government gives you either money or they pay for things for you, like your medical care costs, stuff like that. Okay, these two things are going to affect consumption. This one's going to affect government spending. Okay. Okay, So just like we have expansionary and contractionary monetary policy, we have expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy. Okay, in the face of a recessionary gap, the government can enact expansionary fiscal policy. So price level. And then we have real GDP. I have one question for you guys, or I have one comment for you. Somebody asked me something about, I can't remember who it was. Somebody emailed me about how labor has an impact on output in regards to the aggregate production function and stuff like that. And I just want to remind everybody that when we're talking about the area of production function, that's per capita labor and or per capita real GDP and per capita physical capital. So the number of laborers that you have doesn't change anything, but where it does have an impact on something is through long run aggregate supply. If the number of laborers changes, then our potential output is going to change. Okay. Okay, so if we have a recessionary gap, where is that going to be? Where is long run aggregate supply going to be? To the left or to the right of where SRS and AD cross? To the right, right? We have light. Current output is less than potential output. Now the government can enact expansionary fiscal policy. What does that mean? What are the things that they can do? They can decrease taxes, increase transfers, or increase government spending. Government purchases, I should say. Sorry, because that's what I said originally. Okay. If they do that, aggregate demand will, oops. Shift to the right. Okay, any questions about that? Cool. Okay, same deal for contractionary fiscal policy. Price level, real GDP. Okay. And then this amount right here is the inflationary gap. In the face of an inflationary gap, the government can increase taxes, decrease transfers, and decrease purchases. Okay, this is something that's happening right now, today, literally. Unemployment benefits are expiring. Like expanded unemployment benefits are expiring. Normal unemployment benefits are still staying the same. And government purchases are going to be falling starting in November too. because we're in a period of high inflation. So hopefully that's something that's relevant to what's going on for you guys today. Kelly.
So in the session, what does the notice of the opportunity to
No, good question. Okay, good question, because I want to highlight this. Fiscal policy has nothing to do with money supply. Nope, it does not affect the money supply at all. The only thing that affects the money supply is something the Federal Reserve does. Otherwise, something illegal has happened or the world has ended. Okay?
So the federal reserve got deals with the money supply, but they're not something fiscal policy.
So yeah. So okay, if you're an American, hopefully they like the separation of like the branches of government is like something that you're like a slightly familiar with. The idea is, right, we have the executive branch, the judicial branch, and Congress, the legislative branch. Same idea with the Federal Reserve. Okay, the Federal Reserve, they do their own thing that influences the money supply, independent of what the government does. In the United States, the federal government usually the legislative branch, Congress, sets the budget and determines what we're going to spend money on. Every once in a while, the executive branch can do things that will influence government purchases specifically. But laws that create taxes, the tax amounts that determine transfer amounts, that determine purchases, those are all determined by the government. Okay. So if you're an American, hopefully that makes sense. If you're from somewhere in Europe or Canada or Mexico, the system is very similar. If you're not from one of those places, I can look into it. I don't know. If you're from Japan, it's similar. Australia, China's different for sure. They have a different setup, but any of those countries that I'm talking about, it's pretty much the same. Besides China that I had mentioned, it's pretty much the same. Yeah.
So is fiscal policy like wages? So when the government sets like a minimum wage, like does that change the short run aggregate supply? Because it's a wage change. Or
All
does it
right,
change-
so
it
good
changes
question.
well?
I like what we're thinking about here. That is, the government can do that, but we're gonna limit what we're talking about as far as fiscal policy to specifically taxes, transfers, and purchases. But yes, you're 100% right that they can influence wages. What I would say is that in economics, generally, people cringe at having price ceilings or price floors. Unless there's a really good reason, which there might actually be for wage. Okay, I'm not gonna get into it. But yeah, good question. We're just gonna be talking about these three things. But yeah, you are right. The federal government can enact a minimum wage. We know that wages can influence short run aggregate supply. So yeah, definitely that's another thing. But usually that's like a political lever that they're pulling. Like what in real life, what happens is they're like, oh shoot, we need to like make the economy better, whatever that means. So we're going to spend more money or we're going to lower taxes or raise taxes. Those are things where they're specifically, I mean, they might be politically driven, but they could potentially be only economically driven. Okay.
So they just focus on aggregate demand, at least for this class.
Yeah, what we're talking about here, it's just aggregate demand. Yeah. That's a good question. Okay. Yeah. So we're not going to talk about minimum, but yeah, that's a great question. It's a great idea. Okay, so if that happens, taxes and transfers taxes going up, transfers going down, that is going to decrease consumption. Okay, if you are taxed more, you have lower income. You're going to spend less money. Hopefully that's like pretty straightforward. If transfers go down, similar idea. If government purchases go down, that influences government spending directly, which decreases aggregate demand and output. Okay. Okay. Okay, any more questions about this? I hope this is, I like the people are asking questions. Also, I know I stopped giving out candy. I realized that I'm gonna kill somebody, so come up and get it at the end. Like everybody. But hopefully, because we've gone over monetary policy and we've gone over contractionary, expansionary, that this should just kind of be one addition. The big difference is let's talk about it. Well, we'll talk about the differences at the end, okay? Okay, so we're gonna introduce a couple more topics here. The marginal propensity to consume, which I don't think we've seen before, but maybe we've seen it in micro in unit 1. No, we didn't see it, okay? So the marginal propensity to consume is how much consumers spend of any additional income they receive. Okay, so that's like what it is in words, and like a lot of things, when we talk about something in words, we also like to put it down as an equation. So it's really just the change in spending, or sorry, yeah, over the change in income. Okay? Spending or consumption, okay? This. So my guess is that most of you guys in here, your marginal propensity to consume is somewhere in the like 90%, like 0.9, maybe even 1, right? Like if you have a part-time job that you work at and you get paid, you're gonna go blow that money at Starbucks or Med Deli or whatever it is. Some people are shaking their head no. Okay, well, you're more responsible than I was, I guess, in college. But the idea is, if like the intuitive example that I always use is, for every $100 that I get, how much of that money am I going to spend? And then how much of it am I going to save? Okay, the amount that I spend divided by the 100, right, is my marginal propensity to consume. Yeah.
Would that actually be a part of spending?
No, actually, let me think here for a second. Oh man, that's a good question. I'm gonna put a pin in that because I don't know. For what we're talking about, either way, doesn't matter, because there's this term called exogenous, which just means that I can't do anything to influence my taxes in theory. Like I make a certain amount of money, and I have to pay my taxes. So either way, like that's something that's happening outside of me. Okay. So I'm gonna say no for this class, but it doesn't matter too much. But it's a good question again. Okay. Because if it's like, oh well, I get $100, but then some of it's taxed. Yeah, we're not gonna worry about that for now. We're talking about the money. Let's think about it as like our paycheck, right? So that's at past amount of tax, like after you pay taxes, I guess. Okay. Then there's a equivalent concept, the marginal propensity to save, or the MPS, which is just 1 minus your marginal propensity to consume. Okay, or it's just the change in savings over change in income. Okay, same idea. Any questions about this? Okay. Okay, let's talk about the multipliers now. That's why we introduced the marginal propensities. But, right, we talked about government purchases, increased aggregate spending. Like that's just aggregate demand. Kind of what we're trying to figure out here is like what's going on under the hood that leads to this, when a government increases their purchases, that leads to an eventual increase in aggregate demand. So government purchases go up, then aggregate spending goes up. When aggregate spending goes up, that leads to more disposable income, which leads to an increase in consumption. Okay, so not only do government purchases directly affect government G, they influence consumption as well. Okay? The exact amount is dictated by the equation. Oh no, do I not have it in my back of my head? I think it's this. Wait, oh. Okay, I am so sorry. I'm completely blanking on what it is. And I didn't write it down. I think this is it, but so this change in G is just the change in government purchases. Okay. And it's just 1 minus the MPC, which is also called the marginal propensity to save, right? 1 minus MPC goes on us, MPS, yeah. We're good with not, we're saying it doesn't, yeah, okay? The idea here is that more than just the change in government spending is happening. There's like this ripple effect that kind of boosts the economy even more.
Can you specifically go over the ripple effect just a little bit more detail?
Yeah. So the government builds roads, they buy concrete. The concrete guy is going to have to get another concrete mixer. The concrete mixer is made out of metal. So he's gonna have to get that metal from a metal shop, right? The metal shop's getting more business. They're gonna pay higher wages to the people that work there. So those people have more disposable income. They're gonna spend that income. It's kind of like, that's the idea, okay? Then, again, how it really happens, it's kind of like, oh, like sometimes it's up and down, but that's the idea. The intuitive background is government spends money that directly influences aggregate demand through an increase in G, but also kind of like this ripple effect through consumption. Okay, so it's kind of like a boost. It's like a big boost. Like they can, another takeaway is that the government can very, very quickly influence aggregate demand because of this idea. Okay. We also have the same idea for a multiplier effect on taxes and transfers. Okay, if taxes go down or transfers go up, disposable income goes up, which leads to consumption increasing. Okay. Exact amount is dictated by the equation, you know, the change in taxes over 1 minus MPC, or the change in transfers over 1 minus MPC. Okay, one thing to note, this change is going to be smaller because of what I said, government spending directly affects aggregate demand in addition to the multiplier effect through consumption. But that's not the case for these transfers and taxes. It's just only through consumption, okay? So if you got a question that was like, what's going to change aggregate demand more, a $100 increase in government purchases or a $100 increase in transfers, the answers would be the $100 increase in government purchases, because that goes directly into G, but it also goes into aggregate demand through the consumption multiplier. Okay. Yeah. Would the formula be different? I mean, it's possible. Oh, it's this. Yeah. So right. Thank you so much. It's this, right? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So that's the one that I forgot. Right, which makes sense, and I should have caught because of the money that you spend, or of the money that you get back in a change in taxes, let's say taxes go down, you have more money. Some of that money you're going to save. And so it's not going to go into this multiplier effect. So only the proportion that gets spent is going to go into the multiplier. Thanks. Okay. Cool. Any questions about that? Okay, so one of the last things I want to go over, there are types of fiscal policy. There are what are known as automatic stabilizers. This is going to be government spending and taxes that automatically adjust with the business cycles. Okay. One example here is something like unemployment. Whoops. Right. Unemployment benefits. Or income taxes. Okay, those are things that like, as more people are unemployed in a recession, right? Government spending will just automatically, our government transfers will automatically kind of go up a little bit, right? Which should shift aggregate demand back right and kind of slow the recession down. Okay, so these are things that automatically, like the fiscal policy system is set up to kind of just like automatically have these things happen. Income taxes are the same thing because as people make less money, they have to pay less in taxes. Okay. Then there are going to be things that are discretionary fiscal policy. So this is when the government takes action, like explicit action to change taxes, transfers, and purchases in an effort to affect the business cycle. So one example that I know of, I actually can't think of an example for something that's happened right now that would fall explicitly into this. But one example that I know of is the value added tax was something that used to exist, or the VAT, for certain types of properties. Was eliminated in 2000 during the Great Recession in 2009. Yeah, I would guess though that this is one of, like if you were to Google examples of discretionary, this is probably the biggest one that would show up. Maybe there have been some lately, but the idea here is this is like something that was like a one-time thing, it killed something or added something in. Explicitly to influence the economy. Okay. Yeah.
For the equation, why is it public?
Yeah, because the idea is, and this is where I kind of botched you a little bit. Well, I guess it's good to talk about in retrospect. So what is MPC? It's how much consumers spend for every dollar or every $100 or whatever that they're given, right? So it's the percentage or the ratio of spending to total income change. Okay. So it kind of makes sense, right? That whatever this like if we have this like multiplier effect, the only thing that's going to go into the multiplier is what we actually end up spending, right? Because what gets saved kind of doesn't, like, just like we have the money creation process, what we save doesn't go into like that idea where you have a business gets the money, they can pay higher wages, people get more money, you know what I mean? But for government purchases, the reason why we don't do that is because the government, there's no like equivalent. The government doesn't save money in that way, right? Like the government just, if they increase purchases, it's by a certain amount, right? there's no like consumer deciding how much money they want to spend versus save. Okay. Good question. Okay, so connecting fiscal policy and the federal budget. I know this is something that's important in the book, so we're going to talk about it a little bit. And we talked about tax revenues, right, in either one. So if you have a budget balance of 0, or the budget is balanced, sometimes it gets called, that just means that tax revenue equals government purchases minus transfer payments, okay? So all of the money coming in is equal to all of the money that goes out. If you have a budget deficit, that means tax revenue is lower than purchases and transfers. In general, in the United States, in the last 10 years, we've ran a budget deficit, a small budget deficit, but a budget deficit. The last time we didn't have a budget deficit, I think, was 2011, 2009. I don't remember when. 2011, 2007, we didn't. But yeah, there are a few years where we don't have a budget deficit. But generally, we've been running a small budget deficit. I'm guessing 2020's budget deficit is probably pretty high. Budget surplus means tax revenue is higher than purchases and transfers. This isn't something that's quite as relevant now for a sustained period of time. But throughout the mid to late 80s and early 90s, the government generally had a budget surplus. And then the last thing we want to think about here is the federal government has to think about the macro economy and the operational budget of the government, okay? So the idea is unlike the Federal Reserve, who's just laser focused on the macro economy and trying to fix the macro economy and kind of level out bumps in the macro economy, the federal government has to balance these two ideals, right? These two ideas that they want to have a hopefully roughly balanced budget for all of their, like the military, federal government employees, contractors, build these new things. They want to bring in tax revenue to pay for those things. Okay. But they also can utilize the fact that they're a huge player in the macro economy to influence business cycles, okay, or influence recessions and inflation through aggregate demand. Okay, so they have, unlike monetary policy, they have to think about this budget going on in the background. So they can't just bring taxes to 0 or bring taxes to 100 without also thinking about how that's going to influence how they can pay people, right? How they can pay contractors, how they can pay for the things that they do. Okay. So hopefully this would be a good slide for when you go through and review. Fiscal policy, we have the actors, the federal government. Okay, in the case of the United States, that's typically Congress. Okay, the levers they can pull, or they can change purchases, transfers, and taxes. Output is affected through government spending or consumption. Then you have monetary policy, where the actor is the central bank. In the US, this is the Federal Reserve. The levers they can pull, or they can change the reserve requirement or reserve ratio, the discount rate, and open market operations that they can do. This is going to affect the money supply, which changes nominal interest rates, which is going to affect investment and then consumption. Okay, so that's a big, broad summary. Definitely go through that in depth, but hopefully that's like something that will be good for you guys when you go through and review it. Okay. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Before you go, pumps at 5 due on Friday. I have office hours today. I have office hours tomorrow. Tests on the 8th of November. Next week, early next week, on Monday or Wednesday, I'll tell you guys kind of about. Actually, definitely by Monday, I'll figure out if we're going to do like a review session on like a Thursday, Friday, maybe on the weekend. I don't know. Sunday, I don't know. Sometime we'll do a review session just like we've done. We only have one more chapter. We're going to go over it on Monday. Then on Wednesday, it's going to be a review day. And then you're going to have one more pump set due, but only one more chapter of material. So I know it's been a lot. But if you go through and you review all of this, it's just one more chapter, and then we've got the test. Okay. The next chapter is gonna be chapter 20. Please come up here and take candy because I can't eat too much candy because I have high blood pressure, like it's a hereditary thing. So don't let me have a heart attack and die or whatever happens when you get too high blood pressure. Also, please, for the love of God, do not take Snickers if you're allergic to chocolate or if you're allergic to peanut butter or peanuts. Okay. Otherwise, have a happy Halloween. Thanks for coming in. I gotta run, but I'll be in office hours at noon, okay? Come take candy, please, please, please.
I'm allergic to peanuts.
Okay, thank you. Oh, good, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
I have a question about
Take some.
my midterm.
Okay.
I talked to Eshawn about it. He said he's gonna add a point back